Yeah, get it on. Got to get it on. No choice but to get on. Mandate, get it on. And welcome to the show. It is my daily podcast. We're at the Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro. We're doing a special one-on-one. I've come out here. We have a big announcement to make, but we'll get into that. Good to see you, Ben.
Good to see you, too.
I should plug Ben's podcast, The Ben Shapiro Show, and the website, dailywire.com. And you can also shoot him a tweet at Ben Shapiro. I listen to your show daily. I find myself waking up and sort of waiting for it to hit my phone. It's probably about the highest compliment you can pay.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Podcast. And I'll tell you, it goes off about 9 a.m. SoCal time, but sometimes it goes off at 9:07, 9:04. I get a little anxiety sometimes just sort of waiting for your fresh episode to pop up on my phone.
Yeah, well, that's when the producer has to be fired, right? I mean, that's when we use ZipRecruiter.com.
Yes.
Right? I mean, if you don't break into an ad right there, then you're not doing it right. Been in the biz long enough to know that. Right?
So I'm such a fan of yours, and my son is as well, and my daughter not so much. But she'll grow into you. But there's so much to talk about and have so many thoughts.
That's the story of my high school career, by the way. So, yeah.
And we went to the same junior high, Walter Reed Junior High in North Hollywood, California, together. Years separated by years, but now we've come together
back together, exactly.
in Nashville. So let's talk about the Gruden story. This is sort of breaking news. I know you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I have many thoughts on it. My number one thought is that if the new standard is that whatever you sent in a private email can be revealed by a corporation seeking to cover its own ass,
right,
and that we are all supposed to react to that and then deprive you of what is, at this point, a $70 million contract, I want everybody held to the standard. If this is the new standard, then everybody who's calling for this guy to be fired, including all of the jokers on ESPN who are openly weeping over Jon Gruden's emails, openly weeping. I mean, you're the football guy, so you tell me, right? I was never in a football locker room, and if I had been, no question I would have been stuffed into a locker. But you actually played football, right?
Yes.
So let me ask you, in a football locker room, you've perused some of the things that Jon Gruden said via emails. Would there be actual weeping over the revelation of those emails?
It's weird because, you know, the one thing you didn't want to be in football is called soft. Like, you could be called a lot of things, but if someone called you soft, that was probably the most negative thing that could be hung on you on a football field, because it was a hard game and it was sort of determined that way. So being soft, and I don't get, and by the way, I don't get why people advertise their softness, you know, the ESPN anchors that are openly weeping about this, or are they just virtue signaling and don't really care, which I assume?
I mean, I assume that it's that because, I mean, these are all NFL players, which means they've been in the same room as people who have allegedly raped people, and that obviously didn't break them up too much. I mean, there are active alleged criminals in the NFL right now who have just been signed like this week, and we are supposed to pretend that Jon Gruden's emails, not even from like yesterday, right, about an active player, but emails from like 2011, that men are grown men. First of all, any grown men in any industry who's sitting around weeping about this, like, forget football. Like,
right.
if you're working at like a journalistic outlet, or if you're working at Sephora, like if you're in the back room weeping at Sephora
right.
over somebody's emails from 11 years ago, like the time, I feel like there's a statute of limitations over the weeping, right? Like if the emails were sent yesterday about you and you're really upset about it, I kind of get it. Or if the emails were sent yesterday and they were about somebody like you and they happened yesterday, okay, get it a little less. If they're sent 11 years about somebody nothing like
right.
you, and also irrelevant, and also it's just basically Jon Gruden being vulgar,
right?
Then I doubt the sincerity a little bit.
Well, also, it's kind of interesting because what's been getting a lot of traction lately is the Chappelle special. And one of the clips they keep playing is The Baby, where he's saying this guy killed somebody, but he wasn't canceled, but he said some things about the gay community and essentially was canceled. And his joke that the left hated, which is, you know, killing someone okay, talking shit about the gays, cancel. Well, you kind of bring that up with Gruden, like in a league filled with rapists and some murderers and lots of spousal abusers. You got the guy who made fun of gays email, He's the guy who's got to get out of the stadium.
And you figure that it's got to be the corporate overlords who are basically, I think that it's like the volcano god of wokeness. Basically, they have to take a human sacrifice up to the top of the volcano and they throw Jon Gruden in, and then please don't pay attention to the fact that like 2/3 of the people who are currently playing are going to end up with severe brain damage. And also, don't pay any attention to the fact that we have like this burgeoning scandal where we treated black players and white players completely differently.
Right.
And how we did our actuarial tables with regard to brain damage. And don't pay attention to any of that stuff. Just pay attention. Jon Gruden is a bad man, and we know he's a bad man because the NFL leaked his emails. Remember, this whole thing started because the NFL was investigating the now Washington football team, because we can't call them the Washington Redskins anymore out of fear of pissing off a bunch of white liberals who went to Vassar. Right. And so the idea was that they were going to investigate them over a sexual harassment issue. They culled 650,000 emails and then used Control F apparently to find everything that Jon Gruden ever said.
Right.
And then they're like, I don't know why they have it out for Gruden, but apparently Gruden was like the man on the target board, right? That they were just like throwing darts at.
Well, first
none of the other emails leaked. Like none of the other emails leaked, right?
First off, this is the group that never stops bloviating about McCarthyism and the evils of McCarthyism. Number one, this is the same side of the aisle that has never stopped talking about McCarthyism. And so there's a couple things. One is do we want to live in this world where people just overhear you essentially talking in the next room, having what you thought was a private conversation? I mean, how different is this than you saying, excuse me, I want to talk to Ben over here, and then somebody putting a glass up to the wall and going, I heard him say fag. And then they run back in and then get you fired. Like, is that the world we want to live in?
I mean, I think that's where we are right now. And shout out to my advertiser, ExpressVPN, which protects your online data. But it is really scary. And I think that what it really does have to do with is the complete obliteration of public-private distinctions, which is sort of familiar from dictatorship. And in totalitarian societies, there's no distinction between what you do in public and what you do in private. What you do in private is the public's business because your true self is revealed behind these walls. Now, the reality is that when we interact with each other on a daily basis, the real you, or the you that I'm supposed to care about, is the person I interact with on a daily basis. Right? It's not supposed to be who you are when you're at home talking to your wife. Right? And if we are all supposed to judge each other in almost religious fashion, as like we are the omnipresent eye of God on you at all times, and if you've sinned in any area of your life, or you said something nasty about me in a text to a friend, and then that goes public, we're supposed to respond like that's your true self. I don't actually think that's true, because the reality is that that's when we are most unburdened. But our true self is actually when the rational part of our brain kicks in. Right? So there's this old kind of truism that I don't think is actually particularly true, that if you want to know somebody really down deep, you see what they're like when they're drunk. But the truth is, that's not seeing what they're like the most. Right? Well, if you want to see what somebody is most like, see what they're like when they have the most to risk. Right? See what they're like when they actually are interacting on a daily basis with you. That is a more authentic version of themselves. When you're drunk, your prefrontal cortex ain't working, right? Then it's just your lizard brain that's working. Yeah. That's actually not what is most of you. What is most of you is when you have that bad thought and then the front of your brain kicks in and goes, don't say that. That's bad. Right? And when you're in private, that doesn't happen as much. But that doesn't mean that that's the true Jon Gruden who hates black people and hates gays. Why wouldn't you look to his daily activities when he deals on a daily basis with many black people and gay people as well? And is he discriminating against them? I mean, there's a gay player for the Las Vegas Raiders right now. Is there any evidence that he's ever mistreated the guy?
Well, a couple things. I believe the truest window into anyone's actual character is not drunk, but waking them up. When you wake someone up, they go, what do you want? You go, you got to move your car. It's blocking you. Okay. Well, you blocked me. Fine. It's like, that's the real, you can tell the mean people. There's some people you wake up and they go, oh, it's the car blocking you? Oh, sorry, dude, I came in late. And then other people just start screaming at you. But that's the true nature. I think we've seen it at home. I
mean, if that's the case, then this is the first time that I'll be able to say that I'm a saint and my wife's an absolute monster. Because if I wake my wife up in the middle of the night, she's like, not there. And if she wakes me up, I'm like, good to go.
You wake a woman up at 3:30 in the morning and go, the house is on fire, I'm going to get the kids out. They go, okay, why are you bothering me?
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
Put out the fire. What are you telling me about?
So, all right. So Gruden, well, this is kind of interesting. Well, so I kind of take it to a step further, which is this thing I sort of always say, he's an arsonist who's never struck a match, so I'm not interested in terms of like, here's what's in his heart. Like, I don't care what's in anyone's heart. I mean, God, honest. Like, I don't care if you're racist. I don't care if you're homophobic. As long as it doesn't manifest itself in any legislation or physicality or any. If there's no evidence of it, it's in your heart, it resides. Like, then who cares?
So this is exactly right. So there's this public policy question that's come up because we are now attempting as a society to investigate what's in your heart, right? We actually care a lot less about the policy than we do about what's in your heart, which is why politicians can make you promises that are very sympathetic, we're going to help you, and then the policies completely destroy you, and you're like, but they did demonstrate that their intent was good. When it comes to race, one of the measures that's been used for years, and it's complete bunk, is the implicit association test, right? These are these bias tests that your employer sometimes makes you make, or if you're in college, you get a lot of this where they sit there and they put on a computer screen a black face, and then they flash a nasty word, and then they flash a white face and a nasty word. And did you respond faster to hit the button when it was a black face and a nasty word versus a white face and a nasty word? And this will show if secretly down in the cuckles of your imagination, if down at the very root of it, you're a racist. Well, the problem is that number one, the test is bad because you can game the test. Like, if you take it twice, you'll do better the second time. But number two, more importantly, there is no real world evidence that how you do on the test associates at all with whether you mistreat black people, right? You could completely flunk that test and then go out and be completely nice to every black person that you meet. Are we supposed to care more about how you treat the black people or what you actually scored on this implicit assessment test? And schools have not stopped using the IAT. They continue to use the IAT because we are now in the mold where we believe we have, honestly, I think that when it comes to the tribal divisions that polarize us, we now have a market system in which the demand is really outstripping the supply, like really outstripping the supply. The demand culturally for targets and racists that we can go after and people who are bad people that we don't like and that we can spot like bad instances of actual racism and sexism and bigotry and homophobia. Like the instances of those on a real world daily level are so low that we are being forced to search in like all directions for that. And when we seize on even like the most minute thing, like we'll uncover your emails from 2011, man. We need to satisfy that market. That market is strong.
Right. Yeah, it's a sort of, you're out of real racism when you have to, figure there's hoops and they hung them in the park and the mayor of Oakland is outraged.
That was the best one. That was the best one. They hung up the workout equipment.
Yeah, the black man who did that.
It looked like a news. But
well, the best part about that, and really, to me, it's like the most telling part about where we're sort of at as a society is the mayor of Oakland said, we're going to bring in the DOJ and we're going to investigate this as a hate crime. And then the black gentleman who hung all the hoops said, no, those are just hoops for me to work out in the park. And she said, okay, but we're going ahead with the investigation anyway.
I think
that's a little snapshot of exactly where we're at. You want this thing so badly that you're not going to let facts get in the way of your theme.
It's a great actual. So one of the things that our friend Dennis Prager, our mutual friend Dennis Prager, says is that that he believes in clarity before agreement, and that situation does clarify the complete lack of the left's standards when it comes to how they're going to uphold the standards. So on the one hand, Jon Gruden, no evidence that he's ever acted racist toward anybody, but bad old emails, fired, right? Get rid of him. This guy, right, in the Oakland Park, clearly not a racist, a black man who was working out. And the actual words from the Oakland mayor were, yes, but the impact of the hoops being up, of the non-nooses being up, the intent no longer matters. So in one case, the intent is all that matters. In another case, the intent does not matter at all. So now what you're telling me basically is that you have no standards, right? It doesn't matter whether it was intended to be racist, whether the act is implicitly racist, or whether there is an impact on somebody. Any of those things will serve our purposes, which is to just declare things racist so we can talk about how terrible America is and how your neighbors suck.
And the really scary byproduct of this, which you see with COVID, but I'll give you an example. So I was taking a picture with some firemen, local firemen. I just went to the firehouse, I brought them dinner, hung out, took a picture. And we went outside by the out to where the fire trucks are, the warehouse where they're enclosed there. And we all kind of gathered up around the fire truck, and then we took the picture. And then later on, when we were looking at the picture, you could see that there was a extension cord that they used to plug in, they're charging whatever. And of course they don't want the hot plug sitting on the ground because they hose it down or whatever. Mm-hmm. So they pull it up 2 feet, hoop it up and tie it off. so they can sweep or hose or whatever. And then the person that saw it in the picture said, "Oh, we gotta get rid of that. Like we gotta crop that out." And I was like, "No, we don't." And they're like, "Yeah, but we have." And I was like, "What we think? What do you think's going on?" And they were like, "Yeah, let's just do it." Now, let's be safe. So what this creates, you're sitting around going, "How could this possibly be racist? What are you talking about?" Well, we figured out from Oakland, it doesn't have to be racist. That's the whole point. You just do it. Just take the hoops down. We're going to move ahead with the investigation with the DOJ. Like, that message is a very interesting message, which is, it's sort of like the dad who says, you want to instill terror into your kids, don't hit them with your belt when they get caught stealing or lying. Hit them with your belt randomly.
Correct.
Just
exactly
randomly
right.
beat them with your belt. Like, you come into their bedroom and go, "You were stealing again." And they go, "I've been home all day. I haven't left the house." And you go, "I know you've been stealing." And you go, "Check the Ring doorbell. I've been sick. I've been in bed all day. I'm going to beat you with a belt anyway." You want to freak that kid the fuck out? That's how you do it. And that's how you get your little subjects to go, just crop out the thing with the extension cord. I don't want a beating.
You're totally
for no reason.
This is totally right. So even in animal experiments, right? They've done animal experiments like this where you can use sort of Pavlovian response to dissuade animals from doing particular things. So they'll have squirrels, and if the squirrel hits a particular button, then they'll get zapped, and if they hit another button, then they'll get a nut, for example. And they have done experiments with these animals where you can completely enervate a squirrel into starving itself if you just randomly hit them with the electricity.
Right.
They just will stop hitting any of the buttons. If they feel like, okay, anytime I hit a button, I'm going to get zapped, I'm just going to sit over here, man. And if I starve to death, then I'm going to starve to death. And that's what we're doing to an entire population because the standard is always shifting. You see it with regard to language all the time, right? We go from you must use the non-biological pronouns to, if the person uses pronouns that aren't even like plural pronouns, if they've declared themselves unique pronouns like unicorn self, if you don't use that, then we might punish you. And if you use the wrong terminology here, we might get you. And if you use the wrong terminology here, that is why I think the way people have avoided this is they've started using shortcuts publicly. So when you see somebody who sends you an email and at the bottom they have their pronouns in the email and they're not trans, right? Then the first response should be, "Oh, I see what you're doing here," which is you're just attempting to say, "Leave me alone," right? That's really what this is. Because you're a biological female. We all assumed that you wanted to be called she unless you said something differently. So what exactly is the deal? And the answer is it's all speaking the vocabulary. It's all, if I can signal that I'm part of the mob, then maybe they'll leave me alone. And you see this across the culture. I mean, it happens all the time. If you can propitiate the woke gods, as I say, then you're good to go. I mean, and you can do the worst things. So Jon Gruden, right? He loses his job over saying the F word for gay people in an email 10 years ago. Within the last 6 months, Matt Damon admitted that he used that word, right, with his friends. Mm-hmm. And then his daughter had to come to him and tell him, "Dad, you're really not supposed to say that word." So he admitted that, and he got hit a little bit on social media. And then he was like, "Well, I never meant it that way. I never meant it as like an insult to gay people. I never used it that way." And the rest of the media just went, "Oh, okay. All right." Why? Well, because Matt Damon is part of the in-group, and if you're part of the in-group, you can do whatever you want. They'll give you second chances, third chances. And if you're not part of the in-group, then you can become, so you have two choices now. Do you become part of the in-group and join the roving mob going around and targeting people, which is a lot more fun than being the target of the mob? Or you just kind of wait out here and hope that the mob never gets to you. And that's kind of the binary decision people are being given at this point.
Well, I've often said that if you don't want to get crushed by the waves, you either have to be on the beach or past the waves. Like hanging out in the middle, you're just getting your ass kicked. And it's really the metaphor of the beach. Like it's either be over here or be over there. There used to be a sort of virtue to being in the middle. Like, yeah, I agree with some of this and I agree with some of that. Now you just get pummeled. It's like you literally need to get up on the beach or get out beyond the breakers.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I think, and I've said this to some friends of mine who are kind of, I'd say center left, and people like Barry Weiss, for example. And I've said to Barry, I think that whether the country rises or falls at this point is really not going to be up to the far left, because if it's up to them, it'll fall, or to conservatives who've made their position clear. It's going to be up to all the people who are sort of in the middle, in that squishy middle. do they decide that they're going to either sit this one out and just wait for the very aggressive left to win, this is what you see in corporate America, or are they going to say, listen, I may agree with much of the left in terms of their policy proposals, but I'm not willing to live this sort of life where any second people can just get destroyed and canceled. And I'm not willing to live a life where open debate is considered a bad thing, where even having a conversation with somebody on the other side, like forget it, I didn't even say a bad thing, but I took a picture with a person who once said something that may have been perceived as bad, and so that wrecks you, right? I don't want to live in that world. So if people in the center stand up and say no, then that ends. But if people in the center don't, then this sort of stuff's going to continue, I think.
Well, speaking of, a couple things. One is, for you and Daily Wire, it's a windfall that the left has gone so insane, right?
Absolutely. It's our business model, basically. They cancel people when we uncancel people. And they keep canceling themselves. They keep just pissing off their own audience by destroying people who are pretty popular. You want to come over here? We're waiting out here in the cornfield already. So you want to wish people out into the cornfield, they can come hang out with us.
Do you, it's funny, Dr. Drew, who I correspond with and do a podcast with very frequently, he's always looked at me as like, in 50 years we'll all be chicks. Like I wrote that book 12 years ago.
The single funniest book ever written.
What's that saying to the lens?
Yeah, no, it's so funny. If you want a weird spectacle, Friday nights a few years ago when that book first came out, it's Friday night, it's Shabbat, time of holiness, me reading your book out loud to my parents.
Wow.
Which is a thing that actually did happen.
Well,
it is the funniest thing.
I'm flattered. And so, he understood from working with me for a long time that I don't have any formal education, but I'm sort of like the Indian who puts his ear to the ground going, I don't like that's why the wind is blowing. He knows I have sense. The
wagon train is coming.
The wagon train is coming. The paleface is coming with guns. So he knows that. So he keeps saying to me, where's this ending? Where's it going? Where's it going? And for years, I've been saying safe spaces and octagons. That's it. We're just spreading out. Like it is literally just it's like Priuses and Jeeps with lift kits and knobby tires. Like that, you drive around LA, that's all you see is Jeeps, like huge, 30 inches of ground clearance, and then Teslas.
Right.
It's no more Camrys. We're getting forced into it. You got to make a decision. And the more you try to force someone into a Tesla, the more they go, F it, I want a Jeep. And you're creating that. And that's, because that's what, again, the middle is just where you get pummeled by the waves.
Yeah.
You got to sort of go beach, Tesla, Jeep, go out to sea.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why you're seeing populations engaging in a big store, right? I mean, when last I was on your podcast, I was living in California. And now I live in Florida, and that is happening all over the United States. You're starting to see populations that are red to purple leaving blue states and moving to red to purple states. And you're starting to see blue populations basically double down on the blueness of their areas, and their policies are getting more and more radical. And I think that's going to continue because I will tell you, like, if you lived in California your whole life the way that I did, and you were always a minority, you were always minority politically speaking, you were always, the person who everyone disagreed with, in your area. And then you move to a place where it's kind of 50-50, like Florida's a pretty evenly split state, it kind of is trending red at this point. But people on the left understand that there are right-wing people who exist and vice versa. The stress level dramatically drops. I mean, I'm talking like 20, 25% stress level decrease because you just feel like in California, every time you go out, what am I wearing? What kind of signals am I sending off? Who's looking at me askance because of, and now that you have the whole masking debate, it's got to be a lot worse in California. We went and visited California. It felt like that. It felt like if I went to a store, I didn't want to, I'm double vaxxed. I got vaxxed like literally the day that it was available. I'm very pro-vaccine. And I've been, my parents are vaxxed. My wife is vaxxed. And I would walk into a store and people were staring daggers at you until you put the mask on. And then they put the mask on, these stupid cloth masks that do nothing against Delta. And then it's like, oh, well, okay, now we can all breathe easy. It's like, well, okay, I mean, that's pretty clearly a lifestyle choice. That is not a health choice.
Well, it's interesting you're talking about so it's a couple things. One is I did talk to Dr. Drew about sort of the low-grade anxiety of the mask. I can't tell you how many people I've been with where you go to the restaurant and they go, oh, my mask.
Right.
Oh, my mask. I don't realize it's a low grade. It's not, it's not searing pain or searing anguish. It's just there. And anyone who lives in California has the low-grade anxiety of pulling up in front of the Staples or the Costco or whatever, getting out of the car and going, oh, it's basically, I never really thought about this, but you know when you travel through an airport, it's a kind of low-grade anxiety all the time. It's like, I got my ID. I got my ID. I got my ID. Oh, what do they need? What line do I need to be in? Like, oh, I have my, wait, where's my boarding pass? You know, that thing where you're going through your backpack and it's got 1,500 cubby holes and you're like, oh, I didn't bring my earbuds. They're in the other. Like, but it's a kind of constant, like, what if you never got to leave the airport? You know what I mean? Like, what if you were just at LAX? Like, because I just came here last night and I realized when I enter LAX, it's a lot of like, there's a personal side, which is, do I have my earbuds? Do I have my stuff? Do I have my neck cushion? You know, like, where's my stuff? Where's for the flight? And then there's where's your papers? You know, where's the mask? Where's the boarding pass? Where you got your ID, right? You didn't leave your ID in the car, did you? You know, blah, blah. Like, oh, remember where we parked? I always forget where I park. Take a picture of where we parked in the parking structure. You know, it says, are we taking the shuttle? Do we have to take the shuttle in Delta? It's like, it's a constant kind of it's there.
Right.
And again, you're not running out of a burning building. It's just kind of there. But you think to yourself, what if you just lived at LAX? And I realized, oh, my hair would go gray in 6 months and I would die of some cancer. I mean, I
think you're right. And I think that's what's happened to a huge percentage of the population. Like, if you look at the polls right now, this is what's so stunning to me. So if you're vaxxed, you should feel safe. The vaccines are extremely effective in preventing hospitalization and death. And people are like, well, it doesn't work against breakthrough cases. Who gives a shit? Like, seriously, since when have we cared about you getting a mild case of the flu? This has never been a public health issue, right? You've had the flu 10 times. I've had the flu 10 times. We've all had colds. Like, nobody sits around worrying day in and day out, oh my God, if I don't wear a mask, I'm going to get a mild case of the flu and I might miss a day. No one's ever cared about this in human history. But now we're supposed to care about that. But if you're vaxxed, you're good to go, right? You are. Just that's what the data say. If you are unvaxxed, then depending on your age bracket, you may be good to go or you may not particularly be good to go. And that depends on your risk tolerance, right? And so if you're 65 and you're unvaxxed, then you should be a little more worried. And if you are 30 and unvaxxed, you should be a little more worried than the guy who's unvaxxed, but certainly not as worried as the guy who's 65. But we have no gradations of worry because basically we have now broken down the country into the people who care and the people who don't care. And the people who care, this is what's created this weird kind of paralysis in the population. Everybody who is worried is vaxxed. Everybody who is unvaxxed is unworried. Okay, which should be the precise opposite, right? It should be that if you're vaxxed, you're unworried, and if you're unvaxxed, you're deeply worried because you might get sick. Instead, if you're unvaxxed, it's because you've had the choice to get vaxxed, and you chose not to, and you're not worried. And if you're vaxxed, you're still sitting around going, man, I can't go back to work because what if the sky falls, and what if there's a new variant, and what if somebody gives me a breakthrough case?
But how much of it is actual concern versus a virtue signaling? For instance, you bring up the term Latinx or Latinx. Nobody who's Latin or Mexican, no one gives two shits about it. They don't give a flying fuck. But this is white people concerned on their behalf.
It is the
now,
stupidest
are
thing in the
they
entire
really concerned is my question, because I don't think they are concerned. I think they're pushing something out there. And I don't think the vaxxed are fully concerned about the Trump voting hillbillies who've, in their purview, who've decided to not get vaxxed. I think there's a much more of a signal than there is a actual concern.
So I think, like most things in American life, there's what the elitists, like the people at the top of institutions, think, and then how that bleeds down. So just like in Hollywood, single motherhood is cool, you just don't engage in it, and then it bleeds down to the populace, and population watches the movies, they're like, oh, single motherhood must be cool, and they take it seriously. I think the same thing has happened with regard to vaccinations and masking. The elites keep saying, well, I'm deeply worried. And then London Breed goes to a bar, right? The mayor of San Francisco. She goes to a bar and goes to a concert and she says, oh, the spirit was moving me, so I didn't have to wear my mask. So she obviously doesn't care. Or Gavin Newsom going to the French Laundry, right? He didn't care. He was fine. But I think that the way that bleeds down to a lot of people who know that the way they are going to be morally judged is by whether they wear the mask or not, right? Because if they get sick and they didn't wear the mask, this means they are bad. So for a lot of those people, I think that they actually are kind of worried. And it's a lizard brain worry. It's not like a rational worry, because if you look at the stats, they shouldn't be worried. But if you just keep reading in the media over and over and over that man, it's so dangerous out there. Like Delta you could get seriously, and even if you don't die, you might be hospitalized. And if you're not hospitalized, you could have long COVID. And if you don't get long COVID, you might be out of work for a couple of days or infect somebody else. I think that the way that bleeds down from the elitists who actually know the data and don't give a shit to everybody else who's sort of like second order watching this stuff, I think that does make, so perfect example, so I love my in-laws, but my in-laws watch Israeli TV. Israel has been like rabid on COVID, right? They have a green vaccine passport, and they're now requiring that you be triple vaxxed in order to get your vaccine passport to go anywhere. And they're having a real problem getting young people triple vaxxed because it turns out the data on that is kind of scanty. You don't need to be triple vaxxed if you're 30, probably. And so but my in-laws watch Israeli TV constantly because they're Israeli. And so all they see from Israeli TV is, they're so worried. So when we went out to California, they were actually like they're triple vaxxed. They're bulletproof, man. They could walk into traffic and the car could be made of COVID and they'd be fine.
COVID car. New series coming to Daily Wire. COVID car.
Well, that's basically just any car with James Corden in it. It's just a disease-filled
COVID. Yeah, but But
they're worried because it bled down to them. And I think that's the people who are. Meanwhile, the health minister of Israel was caught on tape on a hot mic saying the green vaccine passports don't do anything to curb the spread of the disease, but we need to encourage people to get vaccinated. So the people at the top know it's bullshit. But the people in the middle, they don't know it's bullshit because they've been told you must trust the institutions. The institutions are going to solve all of your problems. And if you spend most of your life thinking, I don't think the institutions are going to solve my problems, generally speaking, maybe I need to use like a little bit of what we would call in Yiddish seichel, maybe a little bit of common sense would go a long way here. Those people are now being treated as heretics. It's an actual religious war for a lot of folks. It's like you're a heretic if you refuse to obey Dr. Fauci, if you won't listen to the science, and then you're like, well, give me some data to back the science. Like, no, the science. You're like, well, yeah, but I thought data and science were supposed to be coincident. Like, no, you don't understand. The science says that if you protest lockdown in the middle of the summer last year, you will inevitably contract COVID and probably die. But if you go out in the street and you're twerking for George Floyd, you will definitely not get COVID because this virus will not affect you. So long as you are protesting the police and systemic racism in America, the virus won't touch you. You'll be totally 100% fine. You see it even now, right? How many stories have we seen over the past 4 weeks about college football? Right? Oh, these huge college football crowds. Everyone's going to get infected. Everyone's going to die. There's been no uptick in any of those areas. Were there any follow-up stories?
They never follow up.
Of course not.
But that's how you know you were right.
Exactly.
They would love it if somebody died from taking hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin or something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the other thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're telling us how dangerous this stuff is and how many Americans are out of control and taking it. Good. Then get back to us Wednesday of next week and give us the body count, which they never somehow follow up. The journalism we got to get into. I had a couple thoughts that just sort of lodged in my brain when you were talking about sort of living in Florida versus the anxiety of California. And as far as your in-laws go, here's how it works, watching Israeli TV. My sister, many years ago when she was young, 21, 22, she was a hairdresser and she worked in Silver Lake at basically an all-gay hairstylist place. And that was all the clientele, and that was everyone that worked there, and it was Silver Lake, California. And at some point, I said to her, what percentage of society, like, you think is gay? And she was like, 80%. And it's like, she knocked off 20% from her 100%.
Right.
But that's what your in-laws are going through, right?
Of course.
They're just, that's all they see.
And that's not their fault. I mean, when you are exposed overwhelmingly to a small sample size, then you tend to overestimate, right? So they've done polls of this, and they find that there's a huge differential, and this is true on virtually every statistical subject, between reality and what politically motivated people think reality is. So on COVID, if you ask people on the left how many people out of 100 will die of COVID, they're off by a factor of somewhere between 10 and 20, right? Like way off. If you ask people on the left about how many black men are shot by the cops every year, they'll be off by a factor of somewhere between 10 and 100. Right, and the reason is because, again, the media coverage is incessant on this sort of stuff. Right, if a kid dies of COVID, that will receive a blanket media coverage, and it will be treated as though kids are dying everywhere. You'll see articles in the New York Times, and I point it out on my show all the time. The New York Times will run a headline, or the Washington Post, kids getting sick from COVID, and you'll read all the way through, looking for the only relevant statistic, right? How many?
Right.
How many kids are getting sick from COVID and how sick, right? That would be my first question.
Right.
And it's never answered. Or they'll give you a relative statistic. Say, well, 3 times as many kids are getting sick now as were getting sick in January.
Right.
Okay, well, how many kids were getting sick in January? Like,
right.
That's like saying that I was 3 times more likely to get a date in like 12th grade than I was in 11th grade. Well, if my chances of getting a date in 11th grade were infinitesimal and they're now 3 times higher, it's still infinitesimal. Like, that's not how any of that works.
Right.
If you're going to use relative percentages, you need to give absolute baseline rates. They refuse to do this stuff because they want to scare you, because this is about freaking you out unnecessarily. And again, this is coming from somebody who likes the vaccines, who thinks the vaccines are good and you probably should take them. But treating people like they are small babies is going to result in people acting like small babies.
You know, it's interesting to circle back to talking about living in a place where you feel like you can breathe literally without the mask and not feeling like you're being judged all the time, and this sort of low-grade anxiety of the airport analogy. It was funny because in the course of, 7 hours, I went from, LAX, which is like anxiety, mask, what's going on, who's looking, what are the rules, to the inside of a Delta airplane, more mask, more anxiety, to landing in Nashville and kind of going, all right, so this is better. Like most of these people agree with what I'm thinking. But when I walked into the doors of Daily Wire, I was like, now I'm in the womb.
My people, yeah,
I'm in the womb now. But it was interesting. So I walked in this morning and we got in the wee hours and, got about 4 hours sleep last night. So I walked in the kitchen and I need a cup of coffee and it was packed. And I was like, oh, okay, who's wearing a mask? What's going on? Oh, am I touching? Did I brush up somebody or something? And then I went, we can breathe. And so just in a 7-hour period, I went from, high anxiety to mother's milk.
Yeah.
In less than an 8-hour period. So I get that tangible feeling. I want to talk to you, we were speaking about it sort of off the air about danger and how essentially in risk assessment, and I feel like we've lost that. Also, something I brought up a million times to Dr. Drew, which is the death of math, which is like you keep talking about statistics, they keep talking about feelings. And I want to get into all that. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with Ben Shapiro right after this.
Take it back.
All right, so back with Ben Shapiro, and I loved our conversation, so thanks for hanging out and doing it. The death of math. There's a sort of, we've lost our ability to do math, but we're also sort of attacking math. We're going we got to get rid of these test scores that don't come out the way we want with certain groups and so on and so forth. But to me, the 1-2 punch of the death of math with the death of risk assessment, as we go from the tactile sort of analog world into the digital world. So everyone used to live in a kind of world where you had to hook up a plow and there was lots of blades and straps and horses, and you could get kicked by a mule. If you didn't, there's a mule standing there. You want to walk around the front of the mule, or you want to walk around the back of the mule. It was a head on a swivel, constantly. Everything on a farm could take your arm off.
If you got a cut, there was no antibiotics.
Right,
so there was a good shot you might die just from getting a cut.
Right. So there's a lot of that. And I started noticing that the guys in the back of my shop who were in there stretching metal, shaping metal, bending metal, welding, when you're getting out a welding torch or a shear cutter or a bandsaw or a lathe or a router, a lot can go wrong, really fast. Everything's got a blade on it. Everything moves a little differently. So it's a constant calibration. What should I use? How should I use it? Should I wear goggles? Do I need gloves for this kind of thing? Those people seem to be fine with COVID because they seem to have done the risk assessment. They're young. They're not obese. They're healthy. They're fine. Never comes up. Lots of others haven't done the math with the risk, and the non-risk assessment with the death of math creates what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's Exactly right. I mean, I think there are two gaps that we were talking about off the air, and one of these is definitely physical, right? Which is that if you are used to living with a certain level of risk, then adding like a tiny percentage onto the risk in order for you to live your life, you're like, all right, well, every day I might cut off my hand, so is that really that big a deal? And I think that really does exist. If you live in the digital space, if you are like me, you spend all day in sort of an air-conditioned room, and the greatest risk is carpal tunnel, right? Then the idea of I might die because of a thing, that's such an outsized risk for you because the penalty is so grave that you start to think in sort of lizard brain terms, right? As Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, he talks about thinking fast and slow, the idea that you have a system in your brain that is designed to immediately assess the most grave risk and then respond to it. And you go to it extremely fast, which we needed when we were living in the forests and there was a snake on the floor and it was like, okay, how do I respond to this? Is it a vine or is it a snake? Well, I don't know, so I'm just going to run like hell, right? And so there was a time when that served humanity very, very well. But now when the risk levels are so unbelievably low, you actually have to use system 2, which is the slow part of your brain where you actually think about the math. Okay, well, what is this risk more akin to? Is COVID more akin to, driving a car today, or is it more akin to skydiving without a parachute? Like what risk level are we talking about that in order to assess that? And I think that we've lost that in a world where our normal tolerance for risk is so unbelievably low, right? We live our lives, and it used to be that every family would expect to lose a child. Right? It used to be that your expectation when you were born of how long you were going to live was maybe if you were lucky you'd get to 60. Like if you were super lucky you'd get to, and this is talking not about like 1800. We're talking about like the average life expectancy in the United States in 1945 was like 63. Right? So we've increased life expectancy in the United States by almost 20 years over the course of the last half century. And so that has made people more risk averse. Actually, because you feel like, I have more to lose, maybe I could die. So that's one thing that's happened. The other thing that's happened is just that there is a feeling among most people that they are owed safety. They're just owed safety. So it's bred sort of two sorts of people. Because when I think of myself, I thought, okay, I was trying to assess the risks as rationally as possible. And once I got the vaccines, I'm like, 4 sheets to the wind, I'm done. Right. Welcome back to normal. And a lot of people were not. And I was trying to think about that because I'm not the lathe guy, right? Like I'm a Jew who grew up in California, right? I'm one of those guys because I grew up in a big city where even though I'm a gun owner, every time I pick up a gun, I still get that kind of like tingly feeling in my stomach, right? Where like, I'm not super, like I didn't grow up shooting or anything like that. So I'm very kind of risk averse. But I didn't treat COVID like that other than for my parents pretty early on. And so I was wondering why that is. And I think that that's also because there's just a mentality toward risk that can be taught and that we have failed to teach. I think that I was taught that there are risks that are worth taking, and that's probably why we have a pretty successful business over here. My business partners feel the same way. And so if you have grown up with the idea that there are just risks in life that are worth taking and you have to counterbalance what are the risks and the penalties of the risk, you're more likely to come to a rational conclusion. Whereas if you've been trained from the time that you are young to basically just rely on the authorities to protect you at all times, that's a very different mentality. And I think that does cross some of the, I think there are two cross-cutting lines. One is ideological, and one, as you say, is sort of like what you do for a living and how often you associate with risk in your regular life.
Well, it really is a muscle that needs to be exercised. Yep. And I think we're learning more and more that we understand the physical exercise and the muscles need to be exercised, but there's an immune system that needs to be exercised, and there's a risk system. There's many other things that live inside your skin that need to be exercised. And we kind of forgot about that. I'm curious, and I think this all the time, which is, we're talking about risk. We're talking about, you turn on CNN, you hear what Fauci has to say, risk, danger, risk. Why aren't more adults, I say adults because kids aren't really equipped to do this, but why aren't more adults able to kind of assess what's going on? It's really curious to me. And I think a lot of people, they kind of break it up among party lines. Like they kind of go, oh, well, you're going to watch Tucker Carlson and get all the anti-vax, anti-mask, tinfoil hat, whatever. But if you read the Wall Street Journal or listen to Tucker Carlson, you'll probably have a more realistic picture of what's going on in terms of COVID, for instance, statistically, for sure. Like in that it doesn't really hurt kids.
Right.
If you watch CNN, you'll get this grossly overwhelmed, everyone's in danger, everyone is in a mask and, killing fields and schools and stuff like that. Now, here's my point. Your average 46-year-old, why do they not know what's going on? Like, why do they not understand that there's a message, it's being sort of spoon-fed? Everyone who comes onto the network repeats the message. You're not going to have Alex Berenson come on CNN and coach everyone up on statistics and COVID, or you or anyone else who disagrees. Like, is it we know what's going on and we like it, or is it we don't know what's going on?
So, I think some of it is...
Or take, and let me just jump in one more, just take the whole ivermectin thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Joe Rogan said do this, and it's horse paste, and they go into the feed store. Are people not intellectually sort of advanced enough to even Google ivermectin and see what it says?
Yeah, there is, when it comes to the media, this belief that if you just repeat something over and over and over enough, you'll drill it into people's heads. So the idea was anything is there really is an ends justifies the means sort of attitude in a lot of the media, which is we got to get people vaccinated. Vaccines are the solution. Therefore, we can't even talk about therapeutics. And if we do talk about therapeutics that have not been FDA approved for this particular purpose, then we are going to just lie about what they are. So I don't know anything about ivermectin. I don't know whether it's effective or not. I do know that it's not just horse dewormer. Right? It's an anti-malarial. It's been used in pill form for literally years. The person who created ivermectin said he thought that it might be effective against COVID. Okay, the same thing was true of hydroxychloroquine. You remember very early on, there was a story from the media about a woman who gave her husband fish food. Right? It was like, fish tank cleaner. That's what it was. And he died. And then it turns out maybe she kind of murdered him, right? Those allegations came out, which like to anyone with half a brain was like, yes, because you don't go eat fish tank cleaner. But the media covered it like, because Trump said hydroxychloroquine over and over, people were inevitably going to do this, which is why you have to listen to us. My friend Marty McCary from Johns Hopkins, he's constantly talking about this. You remember for a little while there, the only person in America who was openly pushing monoclonal antibody treatments was Governor DeSantis in Florida.
Right.
And the media were like, monoclonal antibodies? You should be focused on vaccines. And then it turned out that the data on monoclonal antibodies was really, really good. And then Biden was like, you know what we should do? Monoclonal antibodies. And the media on a dime swiveled. And it was like, oh, well, this is a pretty good treatment here.
But I'm sort of saying, like, you take your average guy or gal, and they're watching CNN. And the report is that night that President Trump said we should all inject bleach to kill the COVID virus. Now, and I have these thoughts all the time where they go, this guy said this or this guy suggested that. And I go, why would any, look, you hate Trump. You hate everything about Trump. Okay. He's not stupid. He wouldn't inject bleach.
Right.
He wouldn't tell people to inject bleach. There'd probably be a class action lawsuit if he told people to inject bleach. Why, at that point, don't you sort of stop?
So I think that most people, when they view politics in the same way because they don't follow it closely as you would view, like, your plumber, right? So most of us are not plumbers. So you have a problem with your toilet. You call the plumber. The plumber is the trusted institution in this metaphor. And the plumber tells you it's going to cost you X. So if you're a sophisticated shopper, what you do is you say, okay, well, that sounds like that might be a little much. I'm going to get a second opinion from another plumber and get a competitive bid. But a lot of people are just going to go, I don't have the time for that, right? The plumber's here. Yeah, it might cost me a little bit extra, but he knows plumbing better than I don't know anything about plumbing. So just go ahead and fix it and we'll deal with the fallout later. Right? And I think the same thing is true of politics. Most people don't have the time or the interest level to actually look at various sources of information. And so they just go straight to the mental shortcut of, when I was growing up, the place that I trusted was CNN, or my parents trusted was CNN, or the New York Times, or the Washington Post. And so if they tell me something, I don't have the time to actually do my own research. I don't have time to, like, people use shortcuts. And you understand why, because there used to be, number one, a certain baseline level of trust that people wouldn't openly lie to you. But at the same time, I think that because they use the mental shortcuts, and because there's this very strong countervailing response to even saying, what if we get a second opinion? And there really is, right? I mean, like, I say on my show all the time that if you want to know the facts, what you should do is you should listen to my show, and then you should go listen to Pod Save America, and where we are talking about the same story, those are the facts, everything else is the opinion.
Right.
I'll say that because I'm pretty confident that my arguments are good. I've never heard anybody on Pod Save America say that anybody should ever listen to my show, right? Because people who are using Pod Save America for the shortcut, they want the shortcut, and they don't actually want to go and listen to the other show.
I think with your plumbing metaphor, it even goes a little deeper in that the person calls the plumber, and you're right, they don't have time, they don't want to get a second bid to unclog the toilet. But they call the plumber, and the plumber pulls up, and they look out the window, and they go, he's driving a Chevy. I'm a Chevy man. I like this guy.
Yeah.
And then the plumber comes in and says, I want to charge you $5,000 to pull a tampon out of the toilet. And you go, he's a Chevy guy.
That's right.
A Chevy
That's
guy.
right. We look for outside signals
Right.
that
So
are
you go,
indicators of alliance. Yeah, that's right.
Trump said inject bleach. And you go, that sounds, oh, wait, I hate Trump. He said it. He's a Chevy guy.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
That's where we're at.
And confirmation bias is a really dangerous thing. And we are in a weird situation where the confirmation bias used to be provided only to one side. Now you can get confirmation bias from both sides, obviously. But the response has not been, okay, well, maybe we ought to, have a conversation between the two sides and try and reinstill some of that trust. Instead, it's turned into, if you even listen to that guy on the other side, you're bad, right? That we have to actively foreclose the ability to have the conversation. Because if we have a conversation, then you might shift over to that side. You might actually take your viewing and move from that guy or from me to that guy. So that's when you get the media's attempt to actually prevent people from going to other outlets, right? You see the media actually say, like, you're seeing anchors on CNN say things like, Tucker Carlson is an evil white supremacist. Jim Acosta said this like 2 days ago.
Right.
What he said to Andrew Yang, why would you even do an interview with Tucker Carlson? And the answer is, Andrew Yang was a candidate for mayor of New York. Tucker Carlson has viewers in New York and also happens to be a mainstream right-wing host.
Right.
But for Jim Acosta, the idea was, you must never have a conversation with that other guy, because to acknowledge that that guy exists is to lend credibility to his argument and to undercut my own credibility in the process.
Well, it's always a weird thing when they go, why are you validating him? And it's like, well, you're not necessarily validating him. You can go on your show or my show or anybody's show and argue with them all day long. I mean, Gavin Newsom made a big mistake and came on my show. I certainly wasn't validating him, and he certainly wasn't validating me. There was zero validation in the time he was there. And, to the bigger point, I always say, Fauci is always talking about, he wants everyone vaccinated. He goes back on the Joy Reid show 3 times a week and wants to talk about vaccinations and all these right-wing guys in Florida and Texas and Tennessee, they're not getting vaccinated. And it's like, well, first off, you're preaching to the choir when you keep popping up on CNN or MSNBC and telling a bunch of vaccinated, college-educated white people to vaccinate again. That is redundant. Fauci, if you would like to bring your message to the people who need your message, according to you, then go on Tucker Carlson and bring your message, or go on your program, or go on Clay and Buck's radio program, or whatever. Go to the other side and bring your message. And so if you're just an independent man of science, then you would have zero thoughts about that. If it was essentially you were just selling a product, and the product was stormproof siding, and somebody said, you want to go on Joy Reid's show or you want to go on Tucker Carlson's show? You'd go, well, who has the most viewers?
Right.
And
exactly.
then you go, well, Tucker's got 10 times. And you go, oh, well, I'm going to go talk about my siding over there.
Yeah. No,
if it was literally neutral, like a product,
that's right,
then you would happily go sit down with Ben Shapiro and talk about your siding. And by the way, he's the one with the unwashed masses. Like Tucker, he's got all those dumb bumpkins you need to convince. Go make your convincing case on. So why don't you ever pop up on any of those other shows?
Right.
Fauci, if in fact this is your mission statement.
Well, this is why I think that so much of the push right now is really not about making things better. It's about simply blaming people for your own failings. Right. So when Joe Biden at the beginning of September got up and made a speech about the unvaccinated versus the vaccinated, and we're losing patience with the unvaccinated, and then he fell asleep. When he did that, then it was pretty obvious he wasn't trying to convince the unvaccinated to get vaccinated. Right? When he's whispering intimidatingly into a microphone as best he can do, you'll go get vaccinated. When he's doing that routine, you're like, you don't care about the people who are unvaccinated. What you really want to do is say that the failures of the economy or your failure to keep your promise about ending COVID or all this, it's really their fault, right? Because if you wanted to convince, I've spent a lot of time trying to convince people on my side of the aisle to get vaxxed, right? As I say, I'm very pro-vax. So I've spent a lot of time talking to people in my office. I've spent a lot of time talking to people outside the office about whether to get vaxxed or not. And frankly, I've only met with mixed success. Like when I got vaccinated, I think that no one in my office, including my producers, was vaccinated. I was talking every day on the air about why the vax was good and why the data was good and all this. Okay, but the people who I have been able to convince to get vaccinated, it's because they will come and they will say, here are my concerns. And I will say, I hear those concerns, and here is why the data may support your concern or may not support the concern. And here is how you weigh the values. And then you do have to make a judgment call as to whether you think one side has more of a risk than the other side. And if you're 65, the risks are pretty clear, and you should probably go get vaccinated. And so I've convinced people to do it that way. I've never convinced anybody to get vaccinated by saying, you moral idiot, not getting vaccinated. You want to infect the children. You want to just kill all the 85-year-olds around you. Plus, you're probably going to die anyway. And when you die in the hospital, taking up a hospital bed that was meant for somebody else, well, then you should just think about that. Who has ever been convinced to do anything that way?
Well, yeah, find a 28-year-old and go, you need life insurance because you're dumb. And see if you sell them a policy.
Yeah,
that's
right.
I don't think you're gonna. Speaking of Biden, and I do listen to your program on a daily basis, and I know you do pretty funny Biden. Also, you do a lot of good impersonations.
They're okay.
And I don't think people give you credit in the comedy space as they should. But it's interesting. If you watch Biden make a speech and he's slipping and slurring and screwing up names of politicians and generals and whatnot, when you watch it, there's a visual component that kind of distracts a little bit. There always just is. Like literally there's a flag in the background, or he's at the Caterpillar factory in Indiana or something. There's just something going on. When you listen to those clips on your show, like you literally just put the earbuds in and just close your eyes and listen. If you were a doctor, if you're a physician and you saw it on TV, you'd go, well, there may be some cognitive issues. If you just put the earbuds in, you go, wow, there's a big decline going on here. And one thing that drove me insane, and I'm sure it's something you're going to have some thoughts on, is, when he announced, my vice president is going to be a woman. If I can find a woman of color, this drives me insane. What really drives me insane is how half of America just applauded.
It's insane.
It's wild. We have a president. He just doesn't seem like he's going to make it to the end of his term. He just doesn't.
And if he does, him running a re-election campaign or hobbling a re-election campaign, rolling a re-election campaign on a gurney,
that's off the table. Now, to me,
maybe. I mean, they might have to like strap him upright and then just like wheel him around. They might. I mean, because the alternative is
Hannibal
they've got
Lecter style.
Yeah, I mean, like
the refrigerator dolly. Well, I don't even want to think about it, but he seems like
he ain't doing great.
He ain't doing great. Okay, so waiting in the wings is a female of color that everyone applauded. For half the country applauded for because we're so progressive and look at us and look what we've done and look what we've overcome and look what she's overcome. But no one's ever stopped and went, how good a job would she do? And by the way, I get those kind of jobs, which is like, and by the way, I'll just circle back to the Southwest pilots. Like when I was driving to the airport, and it was like Southwest pilots, third of them stayed home and everything was just a clusterfuck. I was like, yeah, because those guys have jobs that count. The preschool teachers and stuff like that, the whole teacher stayed home for a year and a half, no one cared.
Right.
I mean, it didn't do anything. It's like, who cares? There's a lot of who cares jobs. Pilots ain't one of them. When pilots don't show up for work, the system gets shut down immediately. And then there's a bunch of bureaucrats who push papers around that can take a week off or whatever. But President of the United States of America, and we have someone who's deeply unqualified, and that seems to be a general consensus. I'm talking about Kamala Harris from both sides of the aisle.
Well, she has to have a crisis management team, right? He sends her to fix every crisis, but she literally has a crisis management team to handle her because she's the crisis. And it was kind of funny how she went from, you remember early on in the campaign, it was this, she has all the advantages. She was leading in the polls for a little while. She dishonestly attacked Biden. I mean, so dishonestly that I was forced to defend Biden over the busing issue. And then suggested that he should drop out after the sexual assault allegations from Tara Reid.
Right.
And then immediately, ended up completely imploding, and her campaign fell apart. She didn't even last until California. And people were like, wow, that was a terrible campaign. That really fell apart on her fast. And then Biden picks her, and it was like, she is the greatest politician I've ever seen.
Right.
She's unbelievable. And you know what? We maybe underestimated her. And then as soon as she's in office, it's like, oh no, she was just as bad at this as we thought she was going to be. I have never seen a more talentless politician. I mean, really, truly talentless. She makes Hillary Clinton look like just a ball of charms. She's just, It is incredible. Hillary Clinton was a bad politician. Kamala Harris is infinitely worse. I mean, first of all I want to do in life is play a high-stakes poker game with Kamala Harris, because she has the greatest tell in human history, right? If you ask her a tough, forget a tough question, like any question, she breaks into the crazy laugh, the very awkward laugh, and you're like, there's nothing funny. I don't know why you're laughing right now. You just start to slowly back away and out of the room like Homer Simpson into the bush, and you're like...
Also, she doesn't track, maybe it's a California water thing or something. Gavin Newsom's the same way. Like, they don't really track.
No.
When Lester Holt was saying, well, what about the border? And she was like, we've been to the border. And
like, no, you haven't.
He's like, well, but you haven't been to the border. And she was like, yeah, I don't know what this is about. Like, you do not know what this is about?
Well, so the Democrats are in some pretty serious trouble presidentially, depending on whether Trump runs or not. So they can count on Trump running again and getting the nomination. If they do that, the Democrats have a shot at re-election here, because Trump is very popular with his base and very unpopular with a lot of other people. And Joe Biden didn't win any votes in the last election cycle. He won 80 million votes because Donald Trump was running on the other side of the aisle. And for all my Republican friends who are like, there's no way Joe Biden could win that many votes. Have you seen Joe Biden? I'm like, right, but Donald Trump was on the other part of the ticket. Like, are you unaware that you could run literally a corpse against Donald Trump? And he'd be in the basement, and they'd open his coffin every so often, and he would emerge. And then he would say 3 words in the camera, and they'd be like, and then he'd like fall back asleep and be like, and then, you can get 80 million votes that way, but other than
I
that,
agree. And but you have to have sort of big tech in your corner.
Oh, no question.
Well.
Listen, whenever people say, was the election rigged? My question is, do you mean in terms of like actual vote changing, or do you mean in terms of every major institution in our society weighing in on the side of the Democrats, which is what happened in the last election cycle? Because the latter is certainly true. But if their slate is basically President Houseplant over here hiding the water stain and being barely alive, like not sentient, but barely alive, like he can do basic photosynthesis at this point and take some water up into the roots, but other than that, he's toast. And the backup is Kamala Harris, who is just, she is the Michael Scott of candidates. I don't know if you saw that video of her with NASA, talking to the kids and marveling at the telescope with the children. She is so bad at this. First of all, they had to hire a child actor who was significantly better in the video than she was. But she's marveling at the telescope. Oh, look at kids, have you seen the technology in this telescope? So I have a friend who's an astrophysicist at University of California, San Diego. He's like, that technology's been around for like 400 or 500 years, like the technology in a telescope. But she's so bad at this. But if that's what the Democrats have to offer next time around, plus a kind of stagnating economy, there's a reason they're in panic mode right now, and they should be in panic mode right now.
To me, it's this, we love I think you and I are both big fans of the merit-based. It's why we love sports. Everyone loves sports because it's a meritocracy. And when you take Kamala Harris and you shove her into the front of the line, that's the opposite of a meritocracy. And at this point, it's actually real. Like, she could be in there is kind of how I feel. And I just wonder why it feels so good to so many people to take this person who's just not qualified to do this job and have him in that position.
I don't think it does. I don't think it's like Obama. I think Obama in 2008, a lot of people thought we're getting past our racial conflict. This guy's obviously very smart. He obviously is incredibly well-spoken, and he's a good writer and all of this. Like, he's a talented guy. Like, whatever you think of Obama, dude's really talented. And I think people felt like very good about themselves. And then the next 8 years, I think, made a lot of people feel worse about that. when Kamala Harris was selected, it was all astroturfed. I don't think there was like wild enthusiasm in the streets over Kamala Harris. It was that Joe Biden felt like he had to make some sort of concession to the woke crowd. And so he was going to find somebody who fit these. I mean, he literally said out loud, the part you're not supposed to say out loud, right? He didn't say, I'm going to go find the most qualified candidate. And then he picked Kamala Harris. He was like, I want a black woman.
Right.
And then he found Kamala Harris. Well, you've kind of restricted your selectivity there, my friend. Like like with Obama, there was a component for sure of Americans wanted a black president, and so he benefited from that. But nobody ever said, well, we're picking him only because he's black, right? It's because he's good at all of these various things. With Kamala Harris, it was like she literally flamed out before getting to her home state.
Right.
And then he plucked her out of obscurity again when she thought her career was basically toast. And he's like, I will select this person because of these specific characteristics. And the left had to cheer. And I think this does go to a deeper thing right now, which is what you're talking about, which is the whole equity push by the Biden administration. Right? This notion that any inequality in life is chalk upable to inequity in the system. It's due to the unfairness of the system, and thus we must look away from meritocracy and toward other decisive factors. And so we have to get rid of standardized tests. Or in New York, we have to get rid of magnet schools because too many Asian kids are doing well at the magnet schools. So we have to get rid of those. Like, that's incredibly dangerous stuff that they're playing with here. And they can try it out in real life in politics where there's an actual feedback loop from the American public. But I don't think it's going to go well because the American public, we make a lot of foolish decisions for sure. But I don't think that we are in the mood to choose presidents solely based on which intersectional criteria they fit, no matter how off-putting and terrible they are at their jobs.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you said what they're playing with. It made me kind of think of gain of function. It's sort of like we're in a lab and it's like, this seems like maybe it's a good idea, but I don't know. This could be really bad. And a lot of the stuff they're pushing seems like, okay, sounds good, but down the road, where are we going to be? No magnet schools 20 years from now. Like, where are we going to be at, American Airlines, 50% of our pilots are going to be women or African-American in the next 5 years. It's like, all right, sounds good. Not sure
how are you going to effectuate
where
that?
We're going to be. Like, it feels a little gain of function to me.
This is kind of, so I think the single most profound political metaphor of all time was the famous G.K. Chesterton metaphor of the difference between people who are sort of congenitally conservative versus people who are more radical. And that is, you have two guys and they are walking across a field and they spot a fence. And the first guy looks at the fence and he says, I have no idea why this fence is just here in the middle of the field. Like, there's no reason for this fence. I'm removing the fence. And the second guy says, if you don't know why the fence is there, I'm not going to let you remove it. You first have to figure out why the fence was put there, and then we can decide whether those reasons are still relevant, whether you can remove it. And that really is the difference, I think, right now between the left and the right, maybe always, is the difference between people who say, I don't spot the reason for this, or I can't articulate the reason for this, and therefore I have no respect for this thing. And people who say, well, you might want to think more deeply about why something that has stood the test of time is there before you start just ripping it away. So especially something like the meritocracy, which, again, is still the best way of adjudicating prosperity for human beings. Listen, every system that you use is going to be unfair in some way. The meritocracy is unfair on the basis that certain people have natural gifts, right? When you're talking about meritocracy in sports, I am naturally disadvantaged. And I can work out okay, but you put me on a basketball team, and let me just tell you, when you are bad to mediocre at basketball and 5'9", it is way worse than if you are bad to mediocre and 6'5". I'm just not gifted in that area. And so if you had a basketball meritocracy, I would be disadvantaged by that. And in a certain basic cosmic sense, I suppose that wouldn't be fair because I don't have that genetic ability to be good at basketball. Or I'm short and a little fast, but not really, and I can't shoot. So, and the same thing is true when it comes to aptitude for tech, right? Some people are going to be better at tech, some people are going to be worse at tech. And on a certain cosmic level, that's unfair. But the question is, what's your alternative distribution like? On what basis are you going to make an alternative distribution? Right? Are you going to do it based on another immutable characteristic that you can't actually change? Because if you make it based on race, then it's just as unfair because now you're adjudicating whether someone can succeed or fail based on an innate quality that really has no relevance to the prosperity of everybody outside. At least in a meritocracy, you can say, yeah, it's unfair, but the product on the field or on the court is going to be better. Right? If you use a meritocracy in sports, then at least you're not going to watch me clanking a three-pointer off the backboard and not drawing rim. Right? At least you won't be seeing that. And that's true if you do it in tech. At least the products in tech will be good if you use high IQ people who are very good at tech, as opposed to if you don't, in which case the products suck, and you've also used an immutable characteristic to decide whether or not somebody should succeed or fail.
Well, it's funny because this is why they reimagine everything. Like, we're going to reimagine policing, we're going to reimagine schooling, we're going to reimagine housing and healthcare. It's like, I need a plan. I don't need you imagining what could potentially be. Lay out the plan.
And I really think that when it comes to making public policy, and I've been thinking a lot about this, I think that there are three factors that we always need to take into consideration, and unfortunately, we usually dump at least two of them. One is baseline reality, right? Whether it is biology or the realities of the environment, like there are certain baseline realities that just exist. The second is accepted wisdom of the past. Right? You have to accept that things that have been tested and have worked for thousands of years might be there for a reason, even if you can't articulate what the reason is. You at least ought to have a baseline respect for something that has lasted that long, as opposed to the idea that you just pulled out of your ass 35 seconds ago. And the third thing is, basic human reason. Can you explain why you're doing what you're doing? And it seems like very often we are willing to use reason against both wisdom and reality, or we are going to use reality to justify no change, or we are going to use accepted wisdom against reason sometimes. Like, you need to use all three, right? This is a balancing act. You have to accept there are realities. You have to accept that wisdom of the past might have something good to it. And then you have to apply your reason knowing that these other things exist.
But what if all the wisdom from the past came from racists?
Yeah, I mean, that's the pitch, right? That's the pitch. Yep.
All right, Ben Shapiro, the podcast, The Ben Shapiro Show, website, dailywire.com. Shoot him a tweet at Ben Shapiro. And we're partnering with Daily Wire for 6 comedy specials. We'll start the first 2 at the Brea Improv October 30th, and that'll be Rob Riggle and the great Jay Leno joining us for those shows. So you can come on out and smell what the Ace Man is cooking. You can get your tickets at adamcarolla.com. And until next time, this is Adam Carolla for Ben Shapiro saying mahalo. Thanks, buddy.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Always good.
Right? If you use a meritocracy in sports, then at least you're not going to watch me clanking a three-pointer off the backboard and not drawing rim. Right? At least you won't be seeing that. And that's true if you do it in tech. At least the products in tech will be good if you use high IQ people who are very good at tech, as opposed to if you don't, in which case the products suck, and you've also used an immutable characteristic to decide whether or not somebody should succeed or fail.